We're going to go ahead and get started. Incredibly thrilled that you're here joining us today. I'm Justin Clifford. I work at Bereave. I'll be your host today. Loss Leaders is a program centered around how companies could, and frankly, we think should, step up when loss occurs in the lives of their employees. And the reason we're doing these programs, because we do get asked this quite a bit, but Bereave is on a mission to help companies provide the absolute best possible bereavement response when their employees suffer a loss. And in that pursuit, we encounter amazing companies and incredible people throughout the world that can bring so much education to business leaders that are working to build a more compassionate and empathetic workplace. So instead of hogging them all to ourselves, this is our opportunity to get them in front of you. Shameless plug, if you're interested in learning more about Bereave and how Bereave can help you support teammates in their toughest moments, give us a shout. We'd love to show you around a little bit. No obligation, but would love to show you around, get a little feedback if we can. Now, you're here for Julie Barker, and of course, you're not here for the lo-fi beats that I still have on. Sorry about that. Every week. Julie is the CEO of Cultivate Talent here in Indianapolis. Julie's got an incredible background. She served as a full-time HR leader for several scale-ups that are very well known, especially in the Midwest, really overseeing growth, culture, global recruiting, HR talent strategy. She has led talent functions throughout periods of extreme growth, through acquisitions, through integrations, which is a beast. Julie now serves as a coach and a mentor and advisor while running Cultivate Talent, which is fractional HR for early stage companies, to really help set the talent foundation as companies look to scale. She works with internal talent leaders, CEOs, and really helps cast a people strategy to create that foundation. Julie, welcome to Loss Leaders.
Thank you so much for having me on such an important topic, and just always great to serve and connect with you all on this mission.
Yeah, Julie's become a great partner, a sounding board. One of the interesting things is Julie and I didn't know each other before this, but we had a lot of same people in the circle. And after I met Julie, I started talking to people that also know Julie, and some of the more well-known entrepreneurs in Indianapolis just swear by working with Julie Barker. I'm going to throw that plug in. She didn't ask me to, but those are things that I've heard repeatedly since we've gotten to know each other. So thrilled that you're here. Folks, chat is open, and we'll monitor questions pretty diligently, because a big part of today is getting your questions answered if you have them. Now's the time to shoot them if you got them, and we'll send recordings out by the end of the week. We're gonna probably end at about 12:35, 12:40, so just a heads up. But let's get rolling. Julie, for those who may not have worked in early stage companies before, let's kind of start with understanding the basics for the startup scale up environments that you've seen. Can you talk to some of the general characteristics of these companies that have kind of stood out to you?
Yeah, so I think in regards, I'll focus on like how does this kind of tie to our conversation today, and some
Mhm.
things like that are helpful to think about when we're looking at like how we're thinking about policies and support, and what that looks like. So some of the things to consider, right, in the early stage companies, or even as you kind of get to more of that scale up stage, you're thinking about teams where they're in growth. There may be one person and one employee per function, right? So Justin actually is that right now, multiple hats, multiple functions, right? As well as CEO. You will see that right in these early stage companies. So I think that's something to understand as we're thinking about what we're crafting, and how that might be different than a team that has 45 employees in a given
Mhm.
function or title or role, or ownership of something. So I would say that's something to consider. Adaptability and flexibility are key. Change, right? The change curve, and what you're working through there, and what's informing kind of that future strategy, and customers and clients that are helping inform that as well. So I would call out change in that. So those are just
Mhm.
some things that I would say are consideration points for the conversation and discussion we're going to be having today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And having been in some of these environments before as well, adaptability, I think, has been one of the big ones. Change, working through change management, whether that's policy related or talent related, or for me, a lot of go to market type of selling, marketing type of work as well. And I love those words specifically. When you're working with a group of people that are those things, they're adaptable, they're working on becoming good at change management. They're flexible. Can you talk about what kind of culture typically starts to emerge as companies like this start to grow?
Yeah, I think some of the important things are like culture is, supported and also created, through leaders, but culture is every team member that is a part of it. They're helping evolve that. They are, really leading through that. So every team member, is what that culture is. So, I would say, especially right in those kind of early stages, everyone is really, a part of that. So things to consider is, those values in the company and, what those are. I know I'm kind of jumping ahead of a
Mhm.
question we had, Justin, but those values that you develop early on and how those really live and breathe and, what you're really recognizing, what you're really living out in a meeting are really important because that's going to inform how you think about, supporting your team and each other and what you want that to look like. So whether that's how empathy is shown or trust, or again, a lot of that is really important in how you set those early on values, but not just set it, it's what you live out and what leaders are modeling the way in. So
Mhm.
I would say
Mhm.
those are some things that really come to mind there.
Yeah, we could probably do a half day session on uh, building core values and living core values and the differences that can
Yeah,
come from
the
like throwing
impacts.
something on a wall, yeah, versus
Mhm.
actually showing people how to live those out. As you know, you've seen a ton of these environments. I'm curious, are there any um, like watch your step, beware of, mind the gap, any gotchas that you'd like to call out with people building companies as it relates to culture?
Yeah, I would say I think about a couple of leaders that I've worked with, and they could have made some different decisions, but the culture was so important to them that they're like, I appreciate that input, but like, this is so important to me to how we, serve our clients and how we work in the company that I'm going to go on this path, right? Like, so there have been some times where it could have been easier to make another decision or to do something else. But the way that they wanted to show up was more important than maybe that
Mm,
short term one time decision. So I think about things like that that are like that really stand out. And that's in a really productive, positive way. And I think about a couple of leaders specifically that come to mind there. And then in terms of, just kind of learnings and things as, you say you want to be, these things, or you say that your culture is this, or your values are this, but you make decisions that are very different to that, right? In the other way. And actions are always going to be seen as the way or more important than words. We talk about that even with kids, those of us who have kids, right? Like
mhm.
it's true as adults in the workplace, right? So I just would say always those things that you do and the what you model is always going to be what is viewed as kind of the way versus just the words on paper.
Totally, totally. No, that's great. And so some of those gotchas are actually come back to making decisions and acting with those values in mind, because people will see a lot of the things that are outputs from those decisions, and they'll see a lot of those actions. And if they don't line up,
Mhm.
now we've probably got a little bit of started to develop a culture that has a little bit more question than it does clarity.
Yep,
Um,
100%.
so So let's talk about how, like, as you're doing that, because this is as we start talking about policy a little bit, um, policy aligning with culture can be difficult, because policy, as you want to write it, might not align with the values, or the values can guide it. There are a lot of different ways that they can come together or stay apart. But um, eh, thinking about like employee handbooks and the documentation of the people stuff, as a company grows, when do you see those typically show up?
Yeah, I would say allow it to evolve. So there are some things that you want early on, right? To help people understand, what does that look like? I would call out one thing here is that it's not just your values and your decisions. There's also other factors, right, of state-based policies and requirements. So it's always a kind of a unique decision point of all of the different factors, right, to some of
Mhm.
this. So making sure
Sure.
you're working with someone that understands those things, but then don't allow that to be a limiting factor. Those are, call it, minimum requirements. And
Hmm.
I look at some, leaders that are like, okay, well, those are already defined. And it's like, well, but do you like what's defined, right? Or are there things that you would like to do additionally? What would you like that to show up? And then we can look at what is, required in some of those locations, and
Hmm.
how do we make sure that that aligns right with what we need it to be. So I would say, there those are do exist. You need to be mindful and understand what those are, but also, make sure that you have decision points for your company too. I would say with handbook, right? It's one of those, you could have 100-page handbook. Those they're out
Hmm.
there, right? Like those exist, but it's like, I look at this as, what are like guidelines? What are things that you want to help support someone coming into the company to understand things that maybe it'll take them 6 months to figure out, right? Or something that they want to be able to look at first before maybe they have a conversation with, what they're asking or what they're requesting, so that you're making the conversation easier for them
Hmm.
during things that maybe, a bit more difficult. So, this, or again, parental leave, other leaves, time off, whatever that might be, and helping them understand to then have conversations early on. You may not have everything right, spelled out to a T. You're helping inform that through some of your team and that culture, right? But there are some things that will make things easier to have them developed early on. So it's one of those, craft those values early on. Allow that to help with some of your, policies and decision points. And you can leverage someone externally. I know I come in early on, but a lot of times it's, we didn't have anyone, right? So they may not have that. There's people that can help support you in that at a
Yeah.
very reasonable cost to get something in place. And, there are a lot of options there. So I wouldn't say that's a limiting factor. And just start somewhere. Like, again,
Hmm. Hmm.
you don't need it to be pages upon pages, but allow it to be supportive and helpful to help with onboarding. And so if you look at it as it's helpful in that way too, it can be worth it. So
Yeah, totally. You talked about fluidity earlier, and kind of adaptability, and now we're talking about a handbook, which, um, I've experienced really large company handbooks that appear to be really static. They
mhm.
were felt like they were created a decade prior to my arrival. They seemed like they were the same. A lot of the policies reflected, kind of maybe a little bit archaic or antiquated thought. Um, as you think about scale ups and startups, when does somebody look at the policy? Like, is this a quarterly thing? Should you get on a cadence? Is it based off of experiences and what's going on in the business? I mean, how should people think about making sure that handbook stays fluid and reflective
Mhm.
of the people that are developing the culture?
Yeah, I would say there's some key things, like we'll use a different topic since we'll talk a lot on some of the leaves, but let's just talk about time off since it's kind of
Hmm.
related. But let's talk about time off. So that's a conversation where I feel like early on people are figuring out what works in that business. Justin, I know this is a topic you love to talk about with others and learn
Mhm.
from others, but also share what's worked for you. Companies are figuring that out, and so I would think in that situation you want to put something out there, but you also want to learn what's being informed. Like some people will add, hey, we have unlimited, flexible, insert the word that you used for that. But we
Mhm.
want you to take at least this much time off because maybe what they've learned is that their team isn't taking that and they need to
Mhm.
be able to give them a little bit more guideline because they're feeling like they're not sure what like acceptable or, okay is. And so in some cultures that may not be needed, but in some teams they might be learning that that's important and helpful. So just use some simple examples there, but those are things I would say early on. It may be that what you're doing quarterly is adding different policies and practices in there,
Sure.
but then maybe on an annual basis, you're checking point against those, right? What have we
Mhm.
learned? What are we figuring out? Does this still serve us? Is this still
Mhm.
something that we need? Why do we need it, right? Like, why is this in place? Some things
Sure.
are again requirements for states or different things. Some things are because you want people to know how we operate and how we work, and that's going to get informed as more team members are joining with an early stage company, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of learnings there. So it's a great checkpoint if you're using it in the right way to have better discussions as a leadership team, as a company, on what would be helpful. I think getting feedback from new hires, even early stage, because they're still joining, they know they're joining at a time where not everything's defined.
Mhm.
Um, but getting feedback from them, what would be helpful to know up front? What would be, would make things more productive for you,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways you can inform that and evolve
Sure.
it.
Yeah, I love the idea, and you kind of hit on it, but um, having people that could be impacted or other people outside of leadership being around the table to have that discussion. I worked for a startup for 6 years, and we I think overall had this a very similar parental leave policy, but I was part of a very rapidly growing sales organization, and the overarching policy did not fit the day-to-day operations of how sales works and how compensation works. So we were constantly having sort of these little interview sessions with employees and teammates about like what has worked, what hasn't, and I think I mean, we probably changed that thing, at least tweaked it, once a year, just based on that feedback, and that was massively helpful, especially to a group of people who, at the time, had never been through parental leave, right? Um,
Love that.
so I love the idea of getting people involved in getting those perspectives. Let's talk a little bit about, since I just used the example of parental leave. I mean, leave policies in general, I think are a super hot topic right now, especially at Bereave, of course. But parental leave, care leave, medical leave. With smaller teams, there's lots to do, and especially with smaller teams that might have not experienced things to right in their work experience, don't really have a whole lot of context on how to create around those policies. How can leaders like really think through, like, starting from hey, we should think about leave in general? How do they start that conversation internally outside of just saying that?
Yeah. So if we kind of look at holistically, and then I know we'll drill down into some specifics, but I would say a few things I would consider is think about it as support that you want and that aligns to your values. We'll use, for example, I'm going to use a generic term because everyone has their own values, and I always love to hear like how it was created. It's super fun to me. But we'll use like if there was a value that's related to trust, right? And then
Mhm.
if you have a leave policy that is nothing related to trust, right? Like, please send me these documents to show, whether it's for bereavement, whether it's, a different leave. And so you want that to line up. So there are some things that are required, there's some things that you create. So again, that's an example of line up to your values. When you are creating these in a small team, you have to consider the person that is on leave and the team, right?
Mhm.
And so if a person was going to be out for 6 months and there's a company of 10 people, right? Like, you can imagine the impact there. But it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that we can't support the employee too. So I would say it's a balance, and you have to figure out in the company at that time, what can you support? And here's some ideas and things I've seen in terms of like flexible approaches. I have seen companies that are able to give a leave that maybe 100 or a 500 employee company can give, but it looks different. So maybe what they're offering for parental leave in a given location is where you can take half of that full time and half of it part time returning back, because that's a way to give more paid time off, but allow the person to come back, and start easing back in. In some scenarios, that's great. In some, that may not, work as well for the person or for the company, but explore that there's like other paths and ways to do that. I've seen where people, even on parental leave, really appreciate a couple weeks returning back part time to ease into. It's a new schedule. It's a new, they're figuring things out of that, and so it's been really helpful. But again, I think that's a figuring out what works for your team and company, but know that there's other ways you can do that. If we're talking about bereavement, I've seen that where companies want to give more. And here's a call out I'll say. I learned this from Liesel. She is an empathy consultant. I know you know her well, Justin, but just really talking with her a lot about, if you just say take the time that you need, how unhelpful that can be to someone, right? And so being able to craft a policy that shows what you want to support as a company and team, but that you're leaving it open for dialogue, right? Like,
Mhm.
you're not shutting down the opportunity to have a conversation with them, but you're showing like what's supported, because just saying take all the time you need might have someone take zero time because they're not
Sure.
sure what's
Mhm.
okay and what's really
Mhm.
supported. And I'm new and I just don't really want to ask. And that seems really
Mhm.
open ended. I know, for example, my husband is a very different PI or DISC, if any of you know those assessments, than me. And he is a process oriented to the T. And if you
Mhm.
were to say that, he would probably take nothing, because it's like, well, that's
Mhm.
not in a process, or I don't really know. Right.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you also have to understand there's different employees and team members, and different styles, where
Sure.
I'm a high I, and I'm going to ask you questions about that and have a dialogue. So I would just say consider your team, what you want to support, and be intentional there when you're
Mhm.
crafting these. I had a conversation the other day, and it was around making a decision for someone, but making sure that that support that they're able to give to other employees too, so that it's something that they're able to support across their team. And it helped them inform changing a policy a bit, because they're like, yeah, we would be able to do that. And when we
Mhm.
originally crafted this, we weren't sure what that would look like and how that would impact the rest of the company. So
Mhm.
there are times back to evolving and listening and being able to get feedback from your team. And there might be opportunities where, as add a couple more team members, you're able to do things a little bit differently too. So
Sure.
I know
Sure.
quite a few little tidbits there, but some
Yeah.
learnings for sure.
Yeah, one of the things that's super interesting, and you kind of alluded to it with like take all the time you need, right? Everybody's a little bit different on how they process that. Everybody's a little bit different on what they actually need or what they want.
Yeah.
But then I think about even some of the research that we've done and some of the surveys that we've run, and it feels like doesn't feel like the research and surveys that we have done shows that the best experiences from a bereavement leave perspective have a direct correlation to how their manager treated them, not how the business set the policy, but how did the manager show up. And when we dug into it and we interviewed a few people and asked a few extra questions, it turns out that managers more or less disagreed with the policy or said it wasn't enough. I got you, go do your thing, right? And they had to put their necks on the line because the policy wasn't supportive enough. And so now you've got not just this person that is being impacted, but you also have a manager that really is probably doing something against the rules that could probably have some pretty big career impact to that person, right? And get them in some trouble depending on the organization you're talking about. So how do you, like, as you're thinking through the policy, because there are things that are open-ended. I've seen manager discretion, right? But me as a manager is a lot different than Julie Barker as a manager. We're probably very similar. It's probably a bad example, but we've got these different things, and then we end up having different experiences, and now we
Yeah.
start talking about the law, right? We start talking about
Yeah.
equity, right? How do you think through, like, being able to balance that policy as you're working with companies, knowing that managers might do things a little bit differently?
Yeah. I think one of the key things you can do is getting feedback anytime for example, there is a loss or someone, again, if we're thinking about holistic leave, someone went on parental leave, get feedback. What did the manager actually hear from the employee about that process, about the leave, what they needed, right? And the manager may not have shared with you if you didn't come to them for that feedback, but the manager then may share, hey, this is where I felt not equipped, right? This is where I
Hmm.
felt I needed to do more. And having that conversation will allow you to hear and understand why was that, right? What did that team member need? What did the manager maybe just not know that was supported, right? Sometimes it's maybe even just an education or a communication opportunity. It maybe this is the first time they've gone through that given scenario, right? So having that conversation each time and doing a check-in, right, with that manager, and getting that feedback. So that's an opportunity to learn that. There's also an opportunity to really help managers with what does support look like. So helping them with those tools. I know your team does a really great job of really helping with tools, and managers kind of feeling equipped with ways they can show up and just taking care of the calendar, right? Alleviating immediate stress where the person's like, okay, but I got to move all these meetings, and I got to make
Hmm.
sure I can send this one more Slack, or whatever that
Right,
is.
right.
It's small things, but it's like how to help a manager with what they can do to show that support to even alleviate some of those things that can be added stress. There may be things in your policy back to flexibility where learning for bereavement leave, there might be a initial time, but then also there may be a we know grief happens differently, and we know it
Hmm.
happens at different times, right? And like it may not be those first few days when you're going through logistics and working through some of that. There may be different dynamics because of relationship, right? We've talked about this before, Justin, of like um just because there's a loss, you may have a very different relationship. So it may be
Sure.
someone that I've seen once every few years versus a child. There are also things you should consider around pregnancy loss, right? And
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
different factors. So being flexible to understand that grief is happening, in different ways at different times. So being able to help managers understand that, right? When the
Hmm.
person comes back, what does that look like?
Hmm.
And what can support look like? And even having those flexible options for understanding that as well. So I think those are
Sure.
ways that you can help with that. And also just getting that feedback so that you're understanding that what's not working right and why. And there
Hmm.
may be times where you have to share, like, here's how I think we can consider, unpaid leave options beyond a given period of time when
Hmm.
you're in a startup or scale up. Um, I know we would all love to say we could pay someone right for 6 months, but in those situations, right, that isn't feasible if on the financials and also for the current team that's there. But there's
Hmm.
always, things to consider around that is, are we able to do that right? Is that something, we can consider? So would just say dialogue is critical.
Sure. Yeah. Totally appreciate that. And you started hitting on something a little bit there too around, the finances, right? So we think a lot about these good experiences. Like businesses live in glass houses, right? And you've seen a ton of that recently. You know, you can record getting fired, right? People will go to Reddit and post something, and it's got 3 million eyeballs on it, right? So
Yep.
these businesses, we live in these glass houses, um, and I feel like there's opportunity out there to further understand the business case of why you're doing something, right? Can you talk a little bit about the business, especially as it relates to leave, but the business case that you've thought through or been a part of that ends up in one way or another on a really nice leave policy, or maybe not as a flexible, a little bit tighter of a leave policy? Can you talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about if someone's back that shouldn't be back, the performance dynamics you may experience. This could be a team member that is amazing, right? And they have always been a high performer, and all of a sudden, you're in a situation where now you're talking about, performance on that, and were they back when they should be back, right? What did that support look like? So, some of those dynamics,
Mhm.
can definitely show up. In a good way, when someone feels supported, the likelihood, I actually wanted to go back on the stats, you've shared these before, but the likelihood of them from a retention standpoint goes up significantly. I'll actually look for that to even share back out, but they feel even more loyal to that leader, that company, and serving those clients, right? Because they were supported through that. So you think about it from a retention standpoint, you think about it from a performance standpoint, and the impacts can go, either way there. One of the things I want to call out, so you were talking about, just some of the dynamics, right? Especially in tech the last year. One of the things I've seen is when times are really good, people put together really phenomenal offerings for
Mm,
employees and go well above and beyond. I would say use a checkpoint of, is this scalable if we were not performing at this level and we had to scale back our revenue target, or if we had to scale back our team, right? Like, what's something where we can take a step forward and continue to evolve this, but maybe
mhm,
not take 10 steps forward. And
mhm,
it's so much easier to work that path and work ahead and continue to kind of add 10 steps and go 5 steps back, and how that is viewed by an employee. So I see that a lot in the early to mid stage companies, because they want to do those things, right? But it taking that back is a much more difficult conversation. So I think that's a good checkpoint.
yeah, yeah, that is, I feel like in the past probably 2 years or so, a few things getting pulled back, especially
Yep.
based on utilization, I think is probably a big one, right? And folks are I would imagine people in HR, people making decisions operationally are looking at utilization of what is, which benefits are being used to consider whether or not they should keep paying them. And, that's not, uh, uncommon, but probably a lot more common in the past couple of years, especially in tech than it has been in the
For
the previous decade.
For sure. So, something to just really think about when you're taking a step forward in these. It's okay to take 1 to 2 steps and not 10 all at once if you're
Sure.
not sure if you're ready yet, and communicate that to the team, right? This is something important to us, and we're going to continue to look at this. Here's why we made
Hmm.
this decision right now, right? Like, be
Hmm.
transparent and open with how you're thinking about it, and what you're doing right now, and what that looks like, and also maybe why you're not doing other things, because this is something that you want to be able to
Mm.
offer. When you're in early to mid stage, you can't offer everything. Like, I would love
Sure.
to tell you you could, you
Hmm.
can't. Like,
Hmm.
it doesn't make financial sense, and you
Hmm.
can build on those things, but there's so many other reasons you're a part of that stage of a company, right?
Sure.
I love it. It's so fun, right? And
Hmm.
but it's just, those are consideration points. So just
Yeah.
know that, be intentional about why you are offering, things, and communicate that to your team.
Totally. I might throw you on the spot a little bit because I don't think we talked about this, but I love and so if the answer
Sure.
is nothing comes to mind, that's okay. But I'm curious on like success stories that you've seen. It doesn't necessarily need to be around bereavement, but tying tying policy, easy for me to say, tying
Mhm.
policy to values, and maybe some good output of that happening that you've seen that we could share a little bit about. Here's how this could unfold, if done well and thoughtfully.
Yeah. I'll use an example on when a company added pregnancy loss to their bereavement leave policy. A team member said, I would have actually never brought up to my manager or
Mm,
anyone that I even went through this. But because that was shared and it was updated in a company meeting that this was a part of the policy and something that we genuinely, want to support our team in, they felt open to share that they were going through that, but also felt open to have that time from a grief perspective. And
mhm,
just again, that team member feeling so supported and just kind of in that, like, I feel very lucky and fortunate to work a part of this team.
mhm,
So
mhm.
while a small, I think a very important example of ways that that can show up and how that's then viewed by the team member. Did it, like, was the policy remove the conversation? No, it allowed them to have the conversation.
Sure.
So the manager also understood what's going on. Do you have to share everything? No, right? Like, we
Mhm.
want to be able to come alongside a team member with the ability for them to not have to, tell us everything. But if it allows them the opportunity to have a conversation that they want to be able to have, that's great too.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I've heard other stories with the same sentiment around. I mean, it's psychological safety, I guess, if you will. But but because the business is talking about it, it makes it okay. Whether that's
Yes.
starting a family or I mean, list of life events can go on and on and on, right? Caring for a loved one, getting married, all of those things. If the business is talking about it, and celebrating it or starting difficult discussions, you start to feel a lot safer, having heard it from that perspective, and feels like it really opens the door to being able to raise your hand to the right people in the right moments, and you're going to be supported.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Julie, thank you so much. Anything that we need to hit on before we part ways here?
I would just say reach out if I can be helpful. I'm constantly learning, so I am always learning from all of you, right? And folks that I get to, be a part of their teams at different point in time. So hopefully, always adding things to the toolkit and shared experiences. But I learn from all of you too. So continue to share learnings, and if I can be helpful, please don't hesitate to reach out. Justin and team are phenomenal, and just the resources they're providing for all of us trying to evolve what we're able to do from a support perspective. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you all for joining to just continue to grow for your teams and how you can support in a different way. So really appreciate you all taking the time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thank you for the kind words, and ditto right back at you. If there are groups that I had to rate professionally that are really good at sharing what they've learned, it's probably doctors, it's probably attorneys, and then probably HR professionals. Really good at coming together and sharing what they've learned to help support one another, which is awesome. Super generous of you, Julie. Thank you so much. We'll add the links in follow up, everybody, where you can find Julie and Cultivate Talent, with the recording by the end of the week. We are going to take a break next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks on February 7th with the founder of A Grief Warrior, Leslie Barber. Leslie's got an amazing story about her own loss and how she turned her experience into a mission that serves grievers, their supporters, and businesses that employ them. You really won't want to miss this. But Julie Barker, thank you so much. Grateful to have you. Grateful to know you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Talk soon.
Thank you.